Here's the agenda for the next portion of our time together. Basically, we're going to go over the background of the project. Okay, we're going to talk about recent developments. We're going to go over the task. This is the task of actually writing the standards, like what they are actually doing, like how are they doing it. We're going to talk a little bit about guiding principles and themes. We're actually going to go very deep into guiding principles tomorrow on the full day session. And then today we're going to have some practice with writing standards. We're going to just practice with it. Okay, we're going to try our best. All right, so let's just get into it. 2015, this is the background. Oh, and Steve actually is an expert on this, the whole thing, but really this background. So if you want to chime in, Steve, feel free to go ahead and chime in. But you know what I did is I went to that video that we made together and I just took your notes and I'm just going to present your notes. So if you want to add something in, you can, but right now, technically you're supposed to be getting a little rest.
Thank you very much.
So in 2015, oh, sorry, Steve, go ahead.
No, I'm good. Okay,
great. In 2015, the Connecticut Social Studies frameworks were adopted. And that was after the result of about, I would say, a year and a half, 18 months, almost 24 months of work together. Steve led that project along with the Connecticut Council for the Social Studies president at the time, John Tully. John Tully was a coordinator for social studies at Central Connecticut State University at the time. And this was right after the C3 framework came out. You remember hearing about the C3 framework? You heard about the inquiry design model earlier today. This is all right in that same time period. And Connecticut, luckily, was ready to jump on board to pass some new frameworks. The thing was, up until that point, it was almost like 2 decades. We had standards that were in draft form. People were always asking, when are we going to get standards that are fully adopted? You know, it was almost like difficult because you couldn't even point to any document to say, this is why what I'm doing in my classroom matters, right? So at that time, 2014, we started the Social Studies Frameworks project at the time. Steve Armstrong was hired as a consultant for social studies at the Connecticut State Department of Ed. That was huge for social studies community. And also the Connecticut State Board of Education wrote a position statement or published a position statement on social studies education. It didn't even have a position statement on the discipline, right? So these were major developments at the time. I mean, Steve and John, they lifted a heavy lift, and everyone else that helped them, of course. If I said, Steve, you did a great job, he would say, oh, well, everyone else really did a great job. I was just there directing or whatever. So Steve always likes to give everyone else the accolades so that we can learn.
You're doing it, Tony. You're doing a good job today.
I thought so. So what was in the standards, the framework, excuse me, emphasizing inquiry, that was huge. So moving from a teacher-centered, direct instruction approach to teaching and learning social studies and moving to inquiry, looking at the inquiry arc, the 4 dimensions, beginning with questions, looking at disciplinary concepts and tools, evaluating sources, and then finally communicating and taking informed action. That revolutionized the way that social studies was taught at the time. In the document, there were recommendations for content and for themes. Now, the thinking was at the time anyways, that Connecticut's local control, we don't want to step on the toes of anyone that is teaching a great curriculum. So here are the recommendations. These are the things that you could look at if you're doing these certain sets of standards. Also, suggested compelling questions. That was also a big addition, went right along with inquiry. What is inquiry? Well, it starts with a compelling question. Nobody even knew what a compelling question was at the time. So we did our best to assemble some compelling questions that you could find in the frameworks document. And at the time, regional and national praise. Half a dozen states use Connecticut's frameworks as a model to do their own standards reform. Okay, and then we were actually featured, at National Council for the Social Studies for the work that we did. Several of the people that were involved with the project got involved then at the national level. It's almost like a stepping stone to this next level of professionalism. So anyway, national praise. We did a great job. Rolled it out all across the state. We went to, I don't even know, Steve, 20, 25 different schools to roll out inquiry just that 1 year. And it continues. Steve in his role, I think he goes to schools all the time to present on this stuff, even just the basics of what is inquiry, like we got this morning. So recent developments. So over the last, I don't know, it seems like 3 years we were in with the frameworks, and we started hearing that people were looking for teachers and admin were requesting more content guidance. Like, oh, the standards are great, but our newer teachers, our less seasoned teachers, folks that maybe don't have a background in social studies, but they're department leads, or they are administrators at the assistant principal level, or even the curriculum level at the district. They're saying we need a little bit more content guidance. So we were listening, but there has to be money that goes along with these projects. I mean, you just can't come up with something, it's going to happen. In addition to that, a lot of teachers were seeking validation for the good work they were doing, right? So teachers were doing inquiry. They were looking at complex topics. They were diving deep, let's say, into diversity and representation. They were trying to take informed action in meaningful ways, but sometimes they felt like they needed validation for the work that they were doing, and that only the standards document could provide. And then most recently, in 2021, I would say May, maybe early June, the Fordham Institute put out a report that suggested that we needed a little bit more content and clarity in the document. And all of these things started happening right around the same time that Public Act 21-2 was passed last summer. It was in special session in June, and it called for a model curriculum in grades K through 8, a model curriculum grades K through 8. And there was some funding that went along with this. So what happens is Steve, I imagine, was in the room when he found out that, this is how I imagine it happened, Steve. I don't know if this happened. That, hey, there's going to be a model curriculum. And he was like, oh, you know what? We probably need to have standards that have a little bit more content guidance, because if you're going to develop a curriculum, you got to have good standards, right? If you're going to have a good curriculum, it's got to be aligned to good standards. So because of that, the standards project was born, so to speak. Within that law, Public Act 21-2, that called for the model curriculum, there really were several initiatives. And I've grouped these initiatives into two pieces. I feel like they kind of jive together in these two pieces: agency and representation. That's what this model curriculum law is looking for, right? Agency, financial literacy, ideas, understanding about climate change, civics, citizenship, including digital citizenship and media literacy, social emotional learning, racism, right? Understanding to be able to deal with the idea of racism. It says these things are actually listed in the law. Like, you could go to page 592 and find the paragraph. These things are listed out. In addition to that, it says representation, Native American studies, Asian American and Pacific Islander studies, LGBTQ+ studies, military service and experiences of American veterans. Now you'll notice that Black and Latino studies is not listed here. And that's because Public Act 19-12, which was passed in 2019, birthed, I guess you could say, the African American, Black, Puerto Rican, Latino studies curriculum that next year is going to be taught in all of Connecticut schools, or at least offered in all of Connecticut schools across the state. So I imagine that's why these folks weren't listed, or this group wasn't listed in this law here. So but because of that, we had to start thinking about, well, how is it that we're going to be able to organize all this? So Connecticut Council for the Social Studies, Connecticut State Department of Ed, we are the heads of the project. Steve and I are co-directors, and we developed an organizational structure to help us kind of move things along. Okay, so we have the project associates. We've heard a lot from the project associates. It's Rhonda, Allison, Jen, Lauren, Mary, who you hear from tomorrow. They are basically the leaders of the project, right? They're the folks that are kind of moving things along. They're leading the writing, okay? And they're also leading with the thought leadership as well. In addition to that, on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see that we have 4 research assistants. These are folks at the at the graduate level at university in the NEAG school, UConn. And essentially they were doing a lot of the research that kind of helped get this project off the ground. They looked at all of the different, different standards that were out there, right? To figure out what's going to work best for Connecticut, right? So what are the good exemplars? They brought those back to us. They also really did a deep dive into the Fordham Institute report to figure out what they were saying needs the most amount of work. We're going to talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. Again, this is just the overview. And then right now they're actually working on the editing, right? They're trying to take all of the different writing groups and kind of move everything into one voice, into kind of like a vertical alignment. They're really working on the fine tuning of the first draft. And then you'll see here, we also have a professional learning coordinator that we have not hired yet. So if anyone on this call is interested, we have not hired yet. This person will help with professional learning across the state, right? They're going to lead professional developments. Maybe they're virtual. Maybe they are in person at the different schools when it's time to start rolling them out. They're going to be helping with the conference. They're actually going to be helping with a museum teacher collaboration project where regionally one museum will be chosen to work with teachers to come up with curriculum that fits with their classroom. And then we're going to give some money for transportation so they can go on field trips, right? To build this relationship between museums and schools, but do it through the standards project, right? Do it through the learning. So what needs to happen? This person's going to have to be able to work with the teachers and work with the museums to go ahead and come up with a plan to execute a curriculum that could work not only just for that one classroom, by the way, but for other classrooms in the region, right? The idea is that you can replicate this in an area so that we get more classrooms on more field experiences, because place-based learning is just another way that we can really help students become sure civically engaged, but also really understand the material at a much deeper level. So what have we done so far? Way back in November, the steering committee came together. There's probably about 55 people on the steering committee, very big steering committee. And basically we met in November a couple times, one time in December, January, February, March. And basically what we were working on, number one, was looking at what did all of the feedback on standards say from across the country. But also we were developing and cultivating the guiding principles. The guiding principles are the roadmap, so to speak, or I don't know, I'm not a very good bowler. I always like to have the bumpers in my lanes. So these are kind of like the bumpers to help the ball get down to the end and knock down as many pins as possible. I know I need that. Maybe not everyone needs that, but that's how bad of a bowler I am. But anyway, so the guiding principles, we're going to talk a lot about the guiding principles tomorrow. One of the project associates is going to lead a professional development on that. In addition to the project associates in the steering committee, we also have several consultants. Like I was telling you before, we brought in consultants. Jason Chang, who is the second one listed there. We heard from him today. Also, Brittany Yancey is going to be the consultant, or is, the consultant for African American Black Studies and also intersectionalism. We have Michael Bartone from Connecticut State, Central Connecticut State University for LGBTQ+ studies. Chris Newell for Native American Indigenous People Studies. Juan Coronado, who will be on the panel tomorrow for Puerto Rican and Latino studies, also veteran studies. He actually has a really interesting angle. He looks at the role or veterans, Latino veterans. He looks at before they go into the military, their experiences in the military, and then what happens afterwards. Very, very interesting section of study, I believe. And then finally, Alan Marcus is the editing lead. He's from the University of Connecticut. These are the consultants that we brought in to help us massage the standards to make sure that they're hitting the agency and the representation initiatives that are set forth in Public Act 21-2. So the standards project participants, this is where everyone's from. Granted, we don't have full coverage of the entire state of Connecticut. We do have pretty good representation, Southeast Connecticut, I think we could probably use some more of, the corners, I guess you could say we could use some more of, but central Connecticut and, Western, Southwestern, I would say are pretty well represented. So what did we come up with? We came up with the themes: justice, representation, inclusivity, global context, agency, and local connections. These themes are going to be interwoven into the standards. This is basically the guiding principles. We boiled it down. We took all the content suggestions that were in the guiding principles and we boiled it down to these 6 themes. So these themes, again, kind of guide the overall development of the standards project. So we're going to go into each one just quickly. Justice really has to do with illustrating the importance of rights, responsibility, equality, and dignity. We're also going to be interrogating tough topics related to power, bias, and inequity. And we're going to examine the historic and current manifestations of systemic racism. This is what the steering committee came up with, right? So that's what justice is. Now, are we going to have to do some professional development to help people get there? Yes, of course we are. But right now, what we're doing is we're trying to bake into the document something that people can draw from. And the standards will help you reach these themes. Representation, reflecting social diversity of Connecticut's classrooms. That's a priority. Providing opportunities to develop cultural and historical empathy, right? So what does it mean to understand, or excuse me, how can we better understand the perspectives and the experiences of other people, right? And then also we have to be able to question who may be missing from the curriculum. And this is something we have to think about while we're writing the standards. This is something that we're going to have to come back to time and again. Who might be missing? How can we make sure that we make this as inclusive as possible? And inclusivity really has to do with recognizing multiple perspectives, including counter narratives, including the stories that may be marginalized. We need to make sure that we're employing precise, strength-based, anti-biased language, right? That is a tall order. That's a tall order. But this is what we're working on in the standards, so that the standards, when curriculum is developed from them, it will help people be able to do those things automatically into the classroom, because the standards are going to be written in such a way that encourages this right from the jump. And then finally, I think it's important that we posit diversity as an asset and source of national pride, right? This is a good thing. Diversity is a good thing. Global context, examine issues via multicultural and multinational lenses. Consider the interconnected and urgent nature of geopolitical issues, and use multidisciplinary approaches to understand the wider world, okay? How does this all fit within the global context? Agency. This really has to do with that civic action, that taking informed action, preparing youth for civic life with inquiry-based social studies, demonstrate people in groups exercising self-determination, and recognizing celebration and joy as a demonstration of autonomy. We miss that, right? We see the struggle. We see the marginalization, but so often we look over the celebration and joy, right? This is a way of demonstrating autonomy, of demonstrating self-worth, of demonstrating dignity. And that's why celebration and joy actually is a critical component to this entire puzzle. I think it might be not as understood as it maybe could be. And then finally, the last one here is local connections. Local learning serves as a model for regional and global context, bringing social studies alive with relevant place-based examples, and utilizing institutions to make real-world connections. So again, that's a lot of information. Again, this is just an overview. So what's the process going to continue? So how do we make sure we're hearing from folks? So we had stakeholder input, 2 main methods. A survey went out, We had over 500 responses to the survey. Very, very good responses. Also, we had focus groups. And basically what we did was we used the survey and the focus groups to get insight into what needs to be the level of specificity offered in the standards, what social studies educators think is important, and also the types of professional development to offer. Right, so those are the different pieces that came together to kind of help us figure out what we need to do next. Survey responses, again, I think these survey responses actually look pretty good. We didn't get every town, unfortunately. I would love to have had at least a little bit of shading in each town, but I think you get what you get when you do a survey. So you can see here, here's our representation, but I would say that, each of the counties is definitely represented to some degree. So what is our task? Our task really is established by the Connecticut State Department of Ed, and that's to add content to the current social studies framework. So that's what the writers are doing. Where does the content go? It goes into dimension 2, which is the disciplinary concepts and tools. Okay, so how do we do that? We're going to take the original frameworks. You may have seen these before. So you see on the left-hand side here, it's kind of like the first page for grade 5, disciplinary concept and tools. From there, I pulled one section, which is perspectives. And you can see it lists some indicators there. 5.4 specifically is listed. And then, what you see below is the work that they're going to be doing, which is taking the indicators from the frameworks and adding content to the standards. So not only are we going to ask that teachers make sure that students can create and use chronological sequence of related events to compare developments that happen at the same time, we're going to make a suggestion. Do this with the American Revolution. Use a sequence of events to illustrate the causes of the American Revolution. That is a little bit more specific. I think that is a little bit more helpful. That is going to help teachers be able to focus in on what should I learn to more about how can I get students to access this point. That's what we're trying to help teachers do. And then we see another one down here that has to do with perspectives, which is the one from above. Explain why individuals and groups during the same historical period differed in their perspectives. Now let's be specific. Explain how elements of personal identity shaped individual perspectives of the American Revolution. And here's the examples: men, women, Native American, Black, white, enslaved, free, loyalist, patriot. So we listed a bunch of different pieces of identity that you could look at this from or through. Okay. So this is just a little bit more of the same thing, kind of like what it's going to look like. Don't worry about the numbering, but you can see here the blue is the grade level standards. The type of discipline that's going to be is like history, geography, civics, economics. That's like the little code there. And basically, this is just a little overview of what it could look like. And really, there's a difference between standards and curriculum. Content area standards describe knowledge and skills, not a prescription of curriculum, lessons, teaching techniques, or activities. Standards describe what students are expected to know and be able to do. Curriculum describes how teachers help students master the standards, because curriculum and instruction decisions should be made locally. Individual school districts and classroom teachers know what's best for their students. So we're not trying to take curriculum decisions away. We're just trying to help folks figure out what the what is, not the how, not the why, the what. The how and the why, I think, is most powerfully defined by the teachers and the students together. So, all right, let's pause real quick before we get into that. Let me stop my share. Do we have any questions at this point? That was a lot of information, kind of all at once. No questions. Okay. That was wait time, right? I think that counts. Steve, did I miss anything in that description?
No, and I think a lot of some of the struggles, there is a fine line between curriculum and standards. But I think, again, as you stated, the standards are what kids should be able to do and what kids should know, and the curriculum is how specifically do you get there? And you know, I think I would want to say that, you know, there's people like the Fordham Foundation and things that wanted us to do this, but I think we got a call, quite a strong call from, as Tony said, from elementary folks who there's a desire in some elementary schools to do more than do more in social studies. And a lot of these folks wanted a stronger document to help them do that.
Okay. So I do want to take a break in about 4 or 5 minutes or so. I gave you a bunch of information all at once. I'm just going to give you a little idea. Well, you know, actually, let's take a break. I think we've been going on long enough. It's almost been, I would say, almost like 2 hours here. So we're going to stop the recording in just a moment here. We're going to take a break for about, let's do 9 minutes so we can stretch our legs, get some water, and then we're going to come back with some classroom, what's that called? Classroom scenarios. All righty. All right, let's take a break now. Thanks so much. So why don't we have Tammy? There it is. Welcome back, everyone. It is 2 o'clock on the 28th of June, and we are looking forward to getting into some classroom scenarios. So the way that we're going to do this is we're actually going to break y'all up into some groups.
2 groups, I think.
2 groups. I agree. 2 groups. Everyone in the meeting. We're going to share with you in the chat, once I get to it, classroom scenarios. It's a PDF that you can download directly to your computer and pull up on your own. So I just put those in. And again, we're going to split you up into 2 groups. We're going to give you some time to discuss as many as you can in about 25 minutes. And then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about them all. Okay.
Could I just, Tony, if I could,
Please.
just for 1 sec?
Yeah.
These are, you know what, it's harder, maybe not in your place where you teach, but a lot of people say it's harder to teach social studies now. I don't know if it's that way in your place. There's perhaps more pressure from, you know, parents and things of that nature. But the scenarios that you have there are all real life scenarios from the last 3 years that teachers somewhere in Connecticut have faced. So as Tony said, so we can strategize on how to deal with these. These will be, your answers would be helpful to all of us. So strategize, get as many as you can, and then we'll come back and discuss.
Okay. Welcome back, everyone. It is great to see you.
These are, again, real life scenarios. And I just like you to help me and Tony when we hear about these things, how to respond. So I'd be curious to any and all ideas. By the way, do any of these sound unreasonable to you? That these wouldn't actually happen? And these are, I'm guessing some of you may have had these situations in your own school. So how you handle that would be helpful as well. So Tony, you want to read them off and we'll get some, we'll get one at a time, we'll get some responses.
Sounds great. So the first one here is a student comes to class and says that he is Russian and really wants Russia to defeat the Nazis who rule Ukraine. How do you handle this situation? Man, Steve, you really started with an easy one, huh? Man. So what do we think? Maybe we will skip this one. Get in there, Brian.
I'll start.
Yeah.
So we, in my group, we talked about, perhaps asking the student what their understanding of Nazi is to begin with, and to ask them to explain how they connect that to what is going on in the Ukraine. I forget what else we said in our group. So if anyone else in my group who took notes, because I didn't.
The other thing I started was that to think about it from the other person's perspective, the Ukrainian person's perspective.
Right, asking them to think about both sides of the situation.
And empathy.
Mm.
Brian, what school are you at, by the way?
I'm an instructional coach at Pulaski Middle School in New Britain.
Great
Got it.
school.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else have an answer to this one? Is an appropriate answer, is an appropriate response, which many teachers would do, and I say this sincerely, but I think accurately, would be to try to duck the question. Donna, you're nodding your head. Can you give us some background on your thoughts here?
I do think that a lot of times a blanket answer like we're not going to discuss that here or something like that is just an easy way of brushing the situation away. But particularly in a social studies classroom where the scenarios on this list tie to standards, like, but even if it weren't, you know, I was a math teacher before I became a coach, and conversations like this happened in my math classroom too. So I don't think there's any excuse not to have conversations. Although a lot of these conversations my group talked about would probably be best in private, not in front of the whole class, but there's not an excuse to not have the conversation at all.
Mm-hmm.
May I add on to what Donna just said? I think also, should the teacher try to avoid engaging, that could send the message to the student that this is a taboo topic, or the student may realize, oh, I've pushed a button. I can push that button again. So I think I agree with Donna that avoiding it is not the correct way, but we should think of other strategies that engage the student in discourse and thinking from multiple perspectives.
Let's go to the next one, Tony.
Great. Students are begging you to tell them how you voted in the last election. What is your response? I've been there.
When you're old enough to vote, I'll tell you how I voted.
Lauren, what do you got on this one? Lauren, what do you got?
She's coming. There you go.
So I like that response, but we were also talking about how voting is such a complex process that, and it's a private decision. So we were just explaining to students that they should never feel pressured when they have the opportunity to vote to release that information. And it's just a private decision that people make, and we can go into the process of voting, but it's not something that we're going to share. You can talk about the different sides and the opinions that are available, but not revealing that information.
Any other feelings on this? By the way, I want to tell you, I broke this one once. That there was a time I was teaching an AP US history class, and they were begging me. And I said, all right, I'll tell you on the last day of school. Okay, so it was the last day of school, in which I had no idea was, this is true, by the way. They had actually, there was a class bet on who I voted for. And the coolest thing, this is true, the coolest thing is the majority of the class bet wrong, which I think is great, you know, because I always do the devil's advocate thing, you know, and all that. So for those guys, it must have worked. What's next, Tony?
You know, I was going to say, if students asked me how I voted, I would say I took a pen and I filled in a bubble and then I submitted it. That's how I went about doing it. I wouldn't even say if I, you know, it's so politically charged. I wouldn't even say if I did it absentee or in person, or I wouldn't even leave. I would leave that out. All right, the next one here. And I saw Andrea had opened up her mic before, so you're on the hook for the next one here, okay? Well, maybe not this one, but a future one at least. A student comes to a discussion on the Holocaust and says that he doesn't think the Holocaust ever existed. You have always insisted that the student discuss any issue with evidence. He came to class today with articles from 3 websites supporting his view. How do you handle that situation? All right, Andrew, you don't have to jump in on that one.
I'll jump in.
Oh, you will? Oh,
We
good.
were talking about it even just from yesterday with how we talked about digital literacy and understanding of where you're getting your information from and getting a full perspective. And obviously, we all agreed in this one in our group about how this one is very emotionally charged with the fact that the student is bringing in materials and trying to prove themselves. So I think it was Donna had mentioned asking the question of why is always important. And I find that really refreshing to redirect the student. Like, why are you curious about this? What do you understand about the Holocaust? What do you understand? Why is this something that you're curious about? Because clearly the student has a feeling of strong emotion that it's a moment of proof in this situation where they're trying to explain themselves with backing it up with information they found.
Thank you for that.
Deanna, I've got to ask you a question. Do you mind? I'm not suggesting it should. Would your response to this matter if you knew there was several Jewish students in the class?
I don't know necessarily. I don't think so. One of the things that we really work on in 5th grade is understanding perspectives and building empathy and understanding that everyone's opinion is important. So I think regardless of the dynamics in the classroom, it's still important to go through what Donna and Andrea were saying about really going through digital literacy and talking about the why and why this student in particular feels the need to prove this point. Is it because of the dynamics in the classroom, or is it because they heard something at home? Even having a conversation with a student one-on-one could be important too, just to see where this is coming from and why they feel the need to prove this so much.
Deanna, your point is interesting. Would you think that this conversation with the student on this, should this be a classroom conversation or an individual one?
I mean, if it's brought up in front of the entire class, I don't think it can just be dismissed. I think maybe it would need to be handled both ways, where you have a conversation with the whole class, but then you also have an individual conversation with that student, because you don't want to brush it aside, having that big kind of bombshell happen in the class and then have the kids assume that it's being brushed, or maybe you agree with the student, or maybe there's something else going on. There's a reason why you personally don't want to address it. I think it needs to be handled both ways.
Heather, can I ask you a question? Would you mind? Is it our job as teachers to convince that kid that the Holocaust actually happened?
No, I don't think so. I think it's our job to give them the tools to determine that. I think that's the tricky part to all this, right? I think my job as an educator is to teach them the facts, but to be critical and know how to figure out what fact from opinion from any of those pieces. So I think all of these are teachable moments, but as a teacher, I need to have the tools to facilitate those conversations in the right direction. And you're not going to solve it right away, but having the capacity to put it in the right direction while at the same time maintaining that neutral stance.
I would ask you fine folks this, but do you want to leave with your class? And I'm not disagreeing with you, Heather, but do we want to leave with our class any doubt that the Holocaust happened? Is that an item that we want the kids to think, well, there's two sides to this, or we want to debate this? Is there a friggin' debate here? Or is that not our job to, not our job to tell the kid that? Brian and then Donna.
So if I may, I don't know that this will answer the question, Steve, but I'll share a personal anecdote from my own middle school years. I grew up in West Hartford. I went to King Philip Middle School, late 1970s. And I think it was during my 8th grade social studies class. I don't remember specifically a unit on the Holocaust, but something came up and the teacher addressed the class one day because some of the cafeteria workers who were Holocaust survivors heard students making disparaging comments about the Holocaust. I don't know the nature of the comments. And this was repeated to the social studies teacher and he addressed it. And I think that was a very powerful learning opportunity in terms of, I mean, if this were a situation saying, did the Holocaust happen or did it not? And someone said, well, here I am with a tattoo on my arm and I'm serving food in your middle school. You know, I was there, it happened. I don't know that that was the exact situation, but it was a very powerful moment, you know, 35, 40 years ago. So I don't know that that answers your question, but I mean, it does play into, you know, how do we deal with that kind of a situation?
Thank you. Donna, you were going to comment.
I want to thank you for raising that question because I had a similar situation about a different topic with a teacher who had said, I never want to present my opinion. I always want to present evidence that both sides could be correct. But the topic they were covering was slavery wrong or something to that effect, where, you know, there are some times where just saying you don't have an opinion is just not an appropriate way to handle it either. I understand the conundrum, I get it, but there are just some times where I think you need to have a different approach maybe and not stick by the rule that you never want to tell the students. I don't know. I guess I don't have a very well formulated thought about it to express eloquently, but the Holocaust and slavery are two areas where I think it's okay to tell the students there's a definitive right answer.
I would sort of, to support your argument, would hate if my students walked away from the class thinking that this was a debatable issue.
Well, I'm thinking about exactly what Donna just said here, Steve, which was this idea about fact versus opinion, right? Yeah, maybe we're not going to say who we voted for because that is a political opinion based on our perspectives and what have you, but we're not going to say, oh, maybe if somebody started saying, oh, the Declaration of Independence really wasn't on in 1776, it was 1775, you want to be like, well, there are two sides to the story, right? Because that's a fact that definitely happened. I don't know if I like the question about whether or not slavery was good or bad. I think that's a problematic question in itself, but you can't say that like slavery didn't happen, right? That wouldn't be okay. I just think there's just some things, this is a matter of fact, and the debate is about maybe the causes. You could debate the causes, you could debate the effects maybe, but the thing.
How about the 3 articles the kid brought in, Tony, from websites? Oh
yeah, great. Yeah, let's get back to that. That's very good. First off, I don't do this enough. I need to do this more. I need to look more at like verifying and corroborating evidence. So like, okay, great. That's great. Now who produced it? Who wrote it? Are there other sources that back this up or refute it? Like that would be an amazing lesson if you have time in your schedule, because we're all going a million miles a minute with the units that we're trying to teach that are supposed to be amazing, but like these things crop up, that how do we also make time for that? But if we're already teaching students how to do those skills about how to evaluate these sources, maybe it's only half a lesson. All right, this kid brought in these sources. Let's look at them together. Who are these people that put this together? That might be an interesting debate. And then the debate becomes, is this a credible source or not? Not whether or not the event happened or didn't happen, but is the source good or not? If we all determine the source is good, then the facts must be supported in some way by some real evidence. If we're all determined that the sources aren't good, let's move on. This obviously is not okay. We're gonna focus our attention somewhere else.
What's our next one?
Okay, our next one. Students in upper level class ask you your personal opinion on an issue like gun control, like Roe v. Wade, and they're discussing. They want to know what you think. How do you respond?
Our group talked about giving various responses, both sides of a story, kind of. And then, just saying, maybe you don't discuss personal opinions, but without saying that, just giving the both sides.
Would there be any circumstance, let's other than maybe that the Holocaust existed, would there be any other circumstance that you would give that you would think it would be appropriate for a teacher to give opinions?
A tough call.
If not, by the way, 85% of the people I had in college in history class violated that, because does anybody remember professors pontificating on end about what they believed? I do. But Lauren, your thought on this, if you don't mind? What's wrong with giving, as long as, how about if it's specifically stated, this is my opinion? I'm not giving you, is that appropriate, Lauren, or no?
No, because if we go back to the inquiry-based model, we're always trying to go through this discovery period where we may have an idea, but we're also supporting it with sources. So we wouldn't want to just give our personal opinion. The students would have to see, well, where does this opinion come from? So we would want to show them the sources that we're using, to the reliable sources that we're using to form an opinion.
Great point.
And you know what? There's a ton of research. If you give your opinion and the kids like you, guess what? For many kids, that will become their opinion too. So that's another reason that's dangerous. What's next, Tony?
That last one's actually a really tough one. All right, let's see here. Student, oh, this is a great one. I've had this before. Student asks you, why are we studying this? Referring to a specific topic you are discussing. What is your response? Aside from get out of here.
By the way, I'm guessing if we can't legitimately answer that, we're in trouble.
We literally we were laughing at this one, saying, because it's in the curriculum and it says we have to do it. It's in the standard. Right. That's right. What our joke, our laugh was. But we were talking about all knowledge is good. Let's figure it out. You might use this later on. My first great answer is, you need to know this because if you're on Jeopardy and you win $1 million, you have to say you learned it here and you're going to share that money with me. So there are many fun answers to that, and making connections in the future to having that little bit of knowledge. And then I'm thinking a step ahead. Lauren said she has it on her learning targets already, so they don't have to ask. She'll have it up there.
That's good.
Andrew, do you have anything else on this one? The kid asked, why do we have to learn this?
Well, we were talking about the whole inquiry, and we thought about, this is a great question. You're asking why, and diving into that and giving students the chance to understand that when we are learning a topic that may not be interesting to you right now, it's because we're trying to expose ourselves to information that we may never have our chance to see before. So we want to have some thoughts on where we can get some questions formed in our class and go through that whole inquiry and ask questions along the way. But yeah, I mean, that's a pretty disinterested question when someone says, why are we learning this? It's because they probably don't know how amazing it can be.
Thank you. What's next, Tony?
Before we move on, I always thank students for asking me that question, and I encourage them to ask again. I say, if you don't understand why this is important, then thank you for stopping me to make sure that we're going over that, because that is really important. I deal with high school, so if they don't have the buy-in, I mean, it's off. They're off in daydream land. So I always say, hey, ask me anytime. Let's go over this. And my answer isn't always as good as the rest of y'all gave. Sometimes my answer is, we have to, or something. I don't always have the best answer, but I do thank kids for asking that question. All right, so let's just do one more, Steve. Is that all right?
Whatever you want to do.
All right, or maybe two. One or two. All right, a parent calls you and says that
Can you do the one about the about
election?
Nigeria?
Oh,
Do the
yeah.
Nigeria one.
Yep, got you. A student comes to class crying. She's Nigerian. She says that she just heard that a political leader had just called Nigeria a S-hole, S-hole country. I haven't heard this before. She is very upset. She says that she is going to go back to Nigeria every summer, and she loves it there. She's still crying. All this in front of the class. How do you respond? That's a tough one.
By the way, not this is not a political statement, but that was from a comment that one of our ex-president made at some point. So just so you know that. Donna, you have a response.
My first response would be to say to the student, I am so sorry that someone isn't able to see the beauty in where you're from. I'm so sorry that they don't have the perspective to see that, and maybe ask if that student would like to share some good things about her country, either with me privately or with the whole class.
Nice. And skillfully, Donna, you're doing that without getting into the political morass of the others where an inappropriate answer would go there, in my opinion. Brian?
Well, just real quick, what I liked about Donna's response is she tended to the student in the way they're feeling, right? She's because that person was not victimized in some way, right? So like if you're dealing with bullying behavior, you don't turn to the bully and start yelling at them right away. You deal with the person that's being hurt first, right? Help them get through that. And then you can start to worry about the other factors. That's why I really like that response, Donna. Thanks. Sorry, Brian, go ahead.
The only thing I would add to that is to make sure that the student understands that what was said publicly is not necessarily reflective of opinion at large. And that is in part an understanding of American political process, and without getting into all of that political, morass that Steve was referring to, just making sure the student understands that that is not necessarily representative of everybody's understanding and opinion.
And Donna, just so you know, what ended up happening is the student and the teacher did make a presentation on Nigeria and presented it to their class. So that was, and the kid loved doing it, by the way.
What do you think? We're doing one more? The last one? Why do we have to study history?
The kid asked that question. By the way, I teach freshmen at Central Connecticut State University. Many of them are, the only reason they're walking in that door is because it's a requirement. They have no interest in history. What would, if you were in my shoes or whatever shoes you're in, how do you answer that question? Why the hell are we studying this? Why am I in this course? What would you say?
Isn't there a quote about people who don't know history are doomed to repeat it or something like that.
That's probably the most often response to that question, I would say, Steve, right? I think that's what most people say, for sure. What about some other responses, though?
To give you more perspective of the world, I would just kind of direct it as the more you know, the more understanding of the world you'll have, and understanding of people and cultures and where we are today.
And could I tell you the follow-up question? That's right, Andrew, that's good. The follow-up question I've occasionally gotten is, why do we have to learn history, especially since we can just look it up on our phone? How anybody got an answer to that one? I can look up any historical fact that I need to know, would ever know, on my phone. Why the hell would I have to take a course on this?
I get a similar question in the field of math. Why do we have to learn how to do this if I can type it in a calculator? And I think the answer might be the same as history and math might be the same, as that it's not just those facts that are important. It's the thinking that you're doing in the context of those skills and facts. So the facts aren't the important part.
You know, it kind of goes back
I might suggest also that you can look up every of those facts on your phone, but doesn't the history class help you make some sense of all those facts and how they connect together?
It's illustrated in Brian and Andrea's point, right? Brian had a very chronological reason for why we study history, right? So we don't repeat what happened in the past. And Andrea was saying a very empathic or empathetic view or perspective-based view of why history is important, right? It's not just the facts, it's the ability to be able to do the thing that historians do. Yeah, you can go to Wikipedia. I love Wikipedia. Reading Wikipedia doesn't help me think better, though. It just helps me know more. And there's just a little bit of a difference.
Can I just give you one anecdote? And if you're a graduate of Central, I teach there, but how's this for a classic? As they're preparing for the midterm, an email from a student this year. This was in early May of this year. Just checked, sorry to bother you, just checking. California is in the United States, right? I mean, I say, you got it, you're good.
You're in. Okay, so I think we're going to wrap for the day. What a great discussion. I love ending with like just a group discussion like this. Thank you so much, everyone. Before we go to leave, I just want to just share my screen just really briefly about some professional development opportunities that we have coming up. So you know, of course, about the Summer Institute that we have going on right now. There's going to be another one in August with a little bit of different information, right? So if you'd like this one, you want to get more Social Studies Summer Institute, come on out in August. We're going to have some different information, different activities. Tell your friends, what have you. Also, this fall coming up, we have the annual conference, 1014. It's in person. There is going to be a virtual pass for folks that just aren't ready for in person, but we're going to be largely in person at Central Connecticut State University, full day conference. There's early bird specials going on right now for getting your tickets. Okay, so get those now. In addition to that, we have just launched Social Studies Connection podcast. You can access that via ConnecticutSocialStudies.org or iTunes or Spotify or Stitcher or wherever you get your podcasts. You can check those out there. These are just some of the opportunities that we have coming up over the next several months. And with that, we're going to go ahead and close for the afternoon. Does anyone have any comments or questions or anything before we close? All right, we'll see you tomorrow, 9 a.m.
Hey,
if
it's
you're going
been
to be
fun
with
working
us.
with you guys. Enjoyed the day.
Bye, guys. Have a great day. Thank you.